Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another design deep dive. Today we're going to take a look at Rare's Sea of Thieves. I really enjoy this game and I wanted to break down this game on the design perspective because I think a lot of the design criticism it receives is actually unwarranted. Now that's not to say that Sea of Thieves doesn't have its challenges, but I think those challenges are mainly motivational based rather than design based, and I want to break into that a little bit further. As such, we're going to be talking about player archetypes, player motivations, and why players do the things they do in this video a little bit heavier than some of my other ones. I also think it's important to note that when Rare set out to make Sea of Thieves, their overarching goal was to deliver a story-creating game. And I think they absolutely accomplished that goal through some of their design decisions. So I want to work through those design decisions and see how they fed back into that original goal. Sea of Thieves is an open world game, but I think it's really important to emphasize the differences between open world games we see in today's video gaming market. There's really two types of open world games: traditional open world games and what I like to call open world emergent games. Sea of Thieves falls into the latter category, along with games like Breath of the Wild or Minecraft, which are event-driven games. The fun is driven by the player manipulating the events that occur in that game to make their own fun. Whereas traditional open world games are something more like Grand Theft Auto or Skyrim, which are mechanic-driven games. Players learn and master mechanics and then explore in a world where there's no limitations to where they can go, so long as they're using those mechanics appropriately. It's hard to qualify just how much I've played Sea of Thieves, but I would say I've put probably about 100 hours into the game. I mainly only play with pre-mades and my friends. I'm not a pirate legend, which I know a lot of people use as a reference for playtime, and I was a closed beta participant, but I didn't actually play the game on launch, so a lot of the gripes and challenges that the game had out the gate I don't have a ton of familiarity with. Let's start by looking at the gameplay loop of Sea of Thieves, because I think that's the most important part of the design deep dive and how we get back to that original goal of a story creating game. The feedback loop in Sea of Thieves is laughably simple. You get a quest from a quest giver, you go and secure the quest item, and then you return to the quest giver to get gold. That's it. That's the whole feedback loop. Further, from a gameplay perspective, the motivations to complete these quests are also very simple. The only benchmarks for success in this game are what different pirate swag you have, and how many levels you have in the various factions that give you quests in the first place. And again, Pirate Legend is the ultimate goal in this game. Once you've hit 50 levels in any 3 factions, you get the title of Pirate Legend, which really is just more bragging rights and the ability to run Athena's quests, which are high-level, high-risk quests. From a very simplistic point of view, that's it. That's the whole game. Now, at the surface level, that sounds completely dull and miserable and boring and not at all entertaining. But the entertainment value of this game comes not from what you do, but how it's presented to you. I'm gonna go ahead and put down a hard stance. The absolute best part about Sea of Thieves is that it is designed to be a player versus environment game, but in reality, it's a player versus player game. I think this is a really good point to pause and talk about those player motivations that I mentioned in the intro, because this is a really good point to bring them up, and I'm going to build on them through the rest of the video. I'm also going to preemptively apologize because I am going to go through these pretty quickly, but I will include a link in the description if anyone wants to read up further. There are many different ways to define player psychology and what actually motivates a player, but one methodology that's pretty universally accepted in the industry and I also subscribe to is Richard Bartle's taxonomy of player types. Bartle is a game designer, professor, and writer who in 1996 sought out to figure out why people were playing the games he was making. So he took a bunch of players and then asked them the simple question of, why are you playing this game? And the answers he got were dramatically different. What he found was there were 4 different types of players: killers, achievers, explorers, and socializers. And each of those players were coined based on what they did in-game. From a mechanics standpoint, players that are more interested in their own actions fall in the top half, whereas players who are more interested in the game actions around them fall in the bottom half. Similarly, players that are more interested in the world around them are on the right half, and players that are more interested in the players around them are on the left half. Now, these archetypes should be relatively straightforward, but I'm going to go ahead and break them down a tad bit further. Your killers are your players that are interested in dominating the game, learning the mechanics, mastering them, and, well, killing other players. Your achievers are your 100%ers. They want to completely unlock all content, all swag, all this, all that, and have everything ever made in the game at their fingertips. Your explorers really care about the world and want to, well, explore it and find all those nooks and crannies and secrets and Easter eggs and everything that the developer hides for them. And as the name would suggest, your socializers socialize. They want to hang out by the coffee cooler and talk with all their friends in the virtual world. It's also important to note that some of these players mix and match. For example, a killer socializer might use social engineering to befriend somebody in-game, only to kill them a moment later. Role players fall into the socializer explorer category, where they're completely exploring the game from a role-playing standpoint and in character the entire time. I also think it's important to note that within these archetypes there are different types of players. I know there's a lot of awkward wordplay in there, but think of it this way. You can have an achiever whose entire goal is to complete an armor set, and you can also have an achiever whose entire goal is to get every single in-game achievement. Here's why that's important, and here's why I wanted to bring player motivations up. Looking back at the gameplay loop of Sea of Thieves, as well as the fact that it is designed as a PvE but in reality a PvP game, you end up being in a scenario where it is really easy for players to pivot from what they're doing. This is also compounded by the fact that you really don't have to follow any of the quests that Sea of Thieves gives you. Quests are certainly the easiest and most efficient way of gaining treasure and leveling up, but the reality is you don't have to be on a quest to gain treasure. There's plenty of PvE threats that will drop treasure. Treasure will sometimes just be lying around about. And again, I need to emphasize, this is a pirate PvP game. So if someone else is questing and they get treasure, you can roll up on them, sink their boat, take their treasure, turn it in, and you reap the reward. Also, outside of the merchants, which will give you cloth and plants and knickknacks to turn in at certain places, there's really no benefit to actually being on a quest to turn something in. It just makes it a lot easier to find. And even then, on those merchant quests, you'll still get a reward, even if it is very minuscule, just for turning in a random merchant good to a random merchant. In turn, this means that there's no penalty for dropping a quest. Quests are not the only way to progress, and it's really not a timed manner when you're on a quest. So this is where it all comes together. Because you have all these different players that are motivated by different things, playing in a world where anyone can fight anyone, or they can just kind of do their own thing in, again, a player versus environment designed world, you're left with a petri dish of opportunity. If you want to go to a fort and kill skeletons, you can do that. And maybe when you're on your way, you get ganked by a player and suddenly you have to defend yourself. And then you're running low on food, so you have to grab supplies. And then you decide it's not worth it, so you scuttle your ship and start the whole thing over. But then while you're going to the island to pick up treasure chests, you find a sunken ship and you go there instead. And this and that and the other thing. As such, the sea kind of turns into its own character, its own living, breathing, emotional thing that thrives on unpredictability, where anything is truly possible. Thematically, not that I know much about being a pirate in the 1600s, because last time I checked I wasn't, I'd like to believe this is exactly what being a pirate in the 1600s was like. And from a gameplay standpoint, the player's left with a metric fuck ton of tasks that they have to micromanage, both in the world around them and on the boat itself. I haven't even gotten into the boat itself, but on the very surface level, it's a groupthink task machine. The boats are designed with multiplayer crews in mind, so at any given time you have to move sails, stock the boat, patch up holes, load cannons, jump off the boat, jump on the boat, use the various tools the boat has, anchor turn with the boat. There's just a lot of things that the boat has to do. It's a vehicle. A multiplayer-driven vehicle. And even on the flip side of that, that task management that I just got done talking about is really evident when the player is solo slooping. The sloop is a really tight boat that's designed for 1 to 2 players in mind, and you really get a sense of that micromanagement both on your boat and the world around you when you're solo slooping. Now, I opened the video by saying Sea of Thieves has received some design criticism that I didn't think was very fair because it was motivational criticism, but at the same point, definitely existed. And that's a great segue into challenges with Sea of Thieves, and why a lot of players have complained about the content. It's a hill I will die on, but I fundamentally believe that the complaints against Sea of Thieves come from killer players because admittedly there's really not a lot for killer players to do in this game. The combat system, both on boat and in hand-to-hand, is actually really simple. And once a player learns and understands that combat, your killer players are going to be very, very good at that, and they'll probably win almost every engagement. A lot of what Sea of Thieves champions from a player motivation standpoint isn't fit towards killers. All of that run around the ocean, collect treasure, fight PvE challenges, things of that nature, that's really only for your explorers, achievers, and socializers. PvE components are somewhat motivating to killers, but at the same point, much like the gameplay and reward loop, your combat mechanics are pretty thin here as well. So even though there's a lot of PvE threats that could captivate killers, killers are mostly mechanic-driven players, and they're going to run into some challenge there. This also creates a challenge on the flip side because a lot of killer players in Sea of Thieves turn into griefers. And sometimes when you're getting griefed by somebody that's better than you, which happens in this game pretty frequently, it can feel like you've lost all power and you have no opportunity to do better. And a lot of times the only solution to that problem is to scuttle your ship and server hop, which honestly feels really bad. But again, I think a lot of the, quote, this game doesn't have enough content and there's nothing for me to do, unquote, is killer players not understanding that the game doesn't do a fantastic job of captivating them. I do want to acknowledge, and to a degree contradict everything I just said, because with the anniversary update they did bring in a specific PvP mode. And honestly, that mode is really well designed, really fun, and although it is geared towards killer players, will captivate your other 3 player motivations as well. Overall, I think Sea of Thieves does 2 things really well. It completely understands the less is more philosophy. There are quite a few PvE threats in the game, and there's quite a lot of opportunity for PvP to happen, but it's not bogged down with a tremendous amount of content. And ultimately, there's only 5 different types of treasure to pursue, and one of those is a special mode you have to go into. This in turn drives the second thing they do really well, which is juxtapositions. It's an incredibly open and loose world, juxtapositioned with a very, very tight gameplay and reward loop. It's a PvE world juxtapositioned with PvP combat. All of your player motivations clash all at once, and there's really opportunity for everybody to have fun, no matter what they want to do. As a result, Sea of Thieves turns into a game that knows exactly what it is, and does every aspect very, very well. It always feels like there's something to do, and there's several different ways to accomplish any one given task. And at the end of the day, because the only thing there is to do is get more treasure, you're dropped into a world that really feels like the lawless 7 seas. And it's really easy to make friends or form shaky alliances that you don't really trust, get double-crossed at the last minute or double-cross someone else at the last minute, and all of those circumstances and all of that unpredictability is really what drives Rare's original design pillar, which was, let's create a story-creating game. Because every time you log in and every time you play, you're going to have a completely different experience. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I know I got a little bit rambly and hit some high-level points in this one, but I think a lot of those decisions really drive home what Sea of Thieves is. Drop a comment and let me know what you think, and thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time!